You're looking into a nightmare, but not one born of sleep. This is a conscious, calculated, and breathtakingly detailed vision of the end of everything. This is the art of Zdzisław Beksiński, a man who dedicated his life to painting the apocalypse, not with fire and explosion, but with silent, creeping decay. His canvases are worlds where bone become cathedral, flesh become landscape, and everything desolate. Silent screams is frozen in a moment of beautiful, gut-wrenching horror. He didn't title these works. He believed names would limit the profound and personal dread they were meant to evoke. This was his language, clearly a visual symphony of existential fear. But the man behind these terrifying visions was the absolute opposite of his art. In reality, Beksiński was a gentle, witty, and deeply anxious recluse. He was a loving father and a husband who found his own art mildly amusing. He was terrified of the outside world, and his studio became his sanctuary, the only place he felt safe to exorcise the stunningly dark landscapes from his mind. In a cruel and profound irony, the man who painted the most harrowing visions of hell on earth created them not from a place of madness, but as a therapeutic escape from a world he found too loud, too bright, and too cruel. And that is what makes the end of his story so unbearably dark and jarring, because the true horror was not confined to the canvas. In a final act of life imitating art in the most vicious way possible, the very sanctuary he built to keep the world's chaos at bay became the stage for a brutal, senseless, and shocking violence that echoed the darkest themes of his work. The peaceful recluse was killed by the nightmare he spent his life trying to control, forever binding his tragic death to the unforgettable and disturbing paintings he left behind. To understand the darkness of Beksiński's art, we must first understand the shadows of his early life. Born in 1929 in Sanok, southern Poland, his youth was irrevocably shaped by the sheer brutality of the 20th century. He lived through the utter devastation of World War II, witnessing the horrors of the Nazi occupation firsthand, a visceral, real-world exposure to human suffering and decay that will sear itself into his artistic memory. He initially pursued architecture, a discipline that would later manifest in the impossibly detailed, crumbling and skeletal structures that populate his nightmares. But it was after a period of disillusionment with photographic art and avant-garde sculpture that he found his true voice in the 1960s, diving into a style he called his fantastic period, where the surreal and the macabre began to flow from his brush with terrifying precision. This was not the work of a man simply imagining monsters. It was the output of a psyche processing the very real monstrosities of history. Beksiński was a recluse who found his only true peace within the four walls of his Warsaw apartment, a sanctuary he famously kept in a state of creative chaos. He painted obsessively, often to the sound of classical music, not as an act of madness, but as a form of exorcism, a way to purge the pervasive, existential dread that haunted him onto a canvas where he could not control it. However, this sanctuary could not protect him from the profound personal tragedy. He was devastated by the death of his beloved wife, Zofia, in 1998. Then a year later, a crashing blow arrived. His only son, Tomas, a well-known radio presenter and a translator with whom he shared an intensely close but complicated bond, took his own life. Beksiński was now utterly alone. A man who had painted the end of the world, now living in its emotional ruins. His art forever stained by a grief beyond comprehension. And in a final cruel twist of fate that feels ripped from one of his own canvases, the very sanctuary he built to keep the world's chaos at bay became the stage for his own brutal end. On the morning of February 21st, 2005, 76-year-old Beksiński was attacked in his Warsaw apartment by the 19-year-old son of his long-time caretaker, a youth he had known since childhood and had even helped financially. The motive was shockingly trivial, reportedly a refusal to loan a small sum of money. The teenager stabbed the defenseless artist over 17 times in a frenzy of violence. An accomplice then attempted to stage the scene to look like a robbery. The visionary, who had spent a lifetime rendering the textures of decay and despair, met his end not in a grand, surreal catastrophe, but in a shockingly mundane, brutal, and senseless act of betrayal. His death became the ultimate gut-wrenching masterpiece of horror, forever binding the artist's tragic reality to the unsettling prophecies of his art. Now, to truly understand the depth of Beksiński's vision and the haunting mind that created it, we need to step inside the canvases ourselves. He famously refused to title or explain his paintings, believing that any literal meaning would limit the viewer's own personal and emotional experience. So as we explore these next pieces, remember, these are my interpretations, my own gut reactions to the nightmare. I encourage you to listen, but also to ask yourself, what do you see? And more importantly, what do you feel? Let's begin with his Untitled painting from 1984, which I called it The Lovers. And this is perhaps Beksiński's most recognizable and emotionally powerful work. This painting depicts two emaciated figures locked in an eternal embrace as they face what appears to be the end of the world. Their forms have been reduced to essential elements from muscle, bone, and an ineffable humanity that persists even in extreme degradation. The figures appear calcified or mummified, the flesh dried and preserved by some apocalyptic process, yet their embrace suggests that love endures even in the face of ultimate dissolution. The background shows a world consumed by smoke and ash, and the sun blotted out, and no visible signs of life remaining. The painting's emotional impact stems from its dual nature. It is simultaneously a meditation on mortality and a celebration of human connection. Guillermo del Toro observed that the work manages to evoke at once the process of decay and the ongoing struggles for life, noting the secret poetry stained with blood and rust that characterizes Beksiński's approach to such themes. The technical precision of the rendering makes the grotesque form seem eerily lifelike, with infinite details of biological complexities that reward close examination while maintaining the work's overall impact as a statement about human resilience in the face of extinction. This portrait-style painting, created in 1974, which I personally call the Red Figure with Pendant, features a spectral female figure whose cinnabar red face bears countless tiny scars and mysterious markings resembling an esoteric alphabet. The figure's empty eye sockets glow with supernatural light, creating windows into a mystic realm that exists beyond human comprehension. From her gaping mouth protrudes an ornamental pendant containing a painted insect-like creature that seems to writhe with its own life, suggesting themes of consumption, transformation, and the parasitic nature of existence. The work demonstrates Beksiński's dialogue with art history, incorporating Baroque elements like decorative colors and religious iconography while subverting their traditional meaning. The painting's power lies in its combination of beauty and horror, presenting a figure that might have stepped from a classical portrait, why not for the grotesque details that transform reverence into revulsion. The rendering of surface textures, from the soft, scarred skin to the metalwork of the pendant, showcases Beksiński's technical mastery with serving his conceptual goals. The figure's existence in a liminal space between life and death, beauty and decay, suggests the artist's fascination with states of transformation that characterize much of his fantastic period work. This apocalyptic masterpiece, created between 1973 and 1974, I personally call it the Bandaged Crawler, shows a gaunt skeletal humanoid figure crawling across devastated terrain under a sky filled with smoke and destruction. The figure's head is entirely wrapped in a white bandage stained with red, evoking both medical trauma and the preparation of the dread for burial. The crawler's posture suggests extreme physical and spiritual exhaustion, yet the act of crawling implies a desperate will to survive or perhaps to reach some distant salvation. The background shows burning ruins and a landscape scarred by some unnamed catastrophe, creating an environment that speaks to collective trauma and individual suffering. The work carries particular resonance given Beksiński's experience during World War II, when Poland suffered unprecedented devastation under Nazi and Soviet occupation. The bandaged figure has been interpreted as representing the wounded consciousness of post-war Europe, struggling to make sense of incomprehensible trauma. The painting's composition creates a sense of vast space and isolation, with a small human figure dwarfed by the enormity of destruction around it, yet maintaining its dignity through the simple act of forward movement. This work epitomizes Beksiński's ability to transform personal and collective trauma into images of universal human struggle. A surreal mass of skeletal figures in a ghostly flow, created in 1984, I personally call the mass of figures, illustrate themes of decay and death. This densely composed work presents a writhing mass of skeletal and decayed figures intertwined in a ghostly procession towards a dark, arched doorway. The painting suggests both Dante's Inferno and medieval depictions of the dance of death, with dozens of individual figures merged into a single organism of collective mortality. The muted palette of browns, ochres, and grey emphasize the universal nature of the scene. This is not about individual identity, but about the shared human experience of mortality. Ethereal smoke or mist flows around and through the figures, creating an atmosphere that is both supernatural and suffocatingly physical. The work demonstrates Beksiński's ability to organize complex compositions without losing clarity or emotional impact. Each figure maintains its individual character while contributing to the overall movement of the mass towards a doorway, which might represent death, judgment, or simply the unknown. The painting captures existential terror on a collective scale, suggesting that even in death, humanity remains bound together by shared fate and common experience. The technical achievement of rendering so many individual forms while maintaining compositional unity showcases the artistic maturity Beksiński had achieved by the end of his fantastic period. King and Queen is one of the few officially titled works from Beksiński's later period. This painting represents his evolution towards monumental, sculpture-like imagery. The two figures appear to be carved from withering stone or assembled from fragments of torn fabric, existing somewhere between animate and inanimate states. Their forms suggest both regal dignity and complete decay, presenting monarchy as a concept that persists even as its physically manifestations crumble. The restricted color palettes reflect Beksiński's movement away from rich colors of his fantastic period toward a more aesthetic way. The painting demonstrates the artist's new approach to form and meaning in his later work, emphasizing greater simplification of the background and considerable deformation in the figures. Painted without naturalistic light and shadows, the King and Queen exist in a timeless space that could be ancient or futuristic, suggesting that power structures persist across historical epochs even as they undergo constant transformation. The work's title, one of the rarest instances where Beksiński is provided explicit identification, suggests his growing willingness to engage with recognizable symbols and archetypes rather than purely personal imagery of his earlier work. This monumental work represents one of Beksiński's most profound theological statements. Created in 1985, I call it the Crucifixion, depicting a skeletal crucifixion against a dark, star-studded sky. The cross is T-shaped with its horizontal bar parallel to the upper edge of the canvas and bears the decomposed remains of a crucified figure whose bones glow eerily in the darkness. The painting challenges traditional Christian iconography by presenting a God who has not only died but has decomposed completely, suggesting that crucifixion and the second coming are impossible concepts in Beksiński's world view. The Hebrew letter Tau, represented by the T-shape, traditionally symbolized the end of the world, adding another layer of apocalyptic meaning to the composition. The technical execution reveals Beksiński's mature understanding of symbolic representation and his ability to distort familiar religious imagery to create new meanings. The painting poses the terrifying question: if humans are smaller than God's foot, as suggested by the scale relationship in the composition, what force could have been powerful enough to crucify the divine? This work stands as perhaps Beksiński's most direct confrontation with questions of faith, mortality, and the limits of human understanding in an apparently godless universe. This mesmerizing work presents a haunting, surreal landscape. Created in 1975, I call it the cosmic orb. Dominated by a massive celestial orb hovering in a murky sky, the orb appears split in two distinct halves, one glowing with golden radiance, the other immersed in deep aquatic blue, perhaps symbolizing the eternal dichotomy between opposing forces, that is life and death, hope and despair. Small circular forms resembling moons or planets orbit within and around the primary sphere, creating a cosmic ballet that suggests both harmony and chaos. The painting's scale emphasizes human insignificance against the vastness of the universe, a recurring theme in Beksiński's exploration of existential questions. The terrestrial portion of the cosmic features vibrant, warm tones that echo the colors of the celestial sphere, depicting a desolate yet fiery desert or barren expanse. A peculiar structure resembling part of a ship juts from the sand, tilted and partially buried, contributing to an overall narrative of abandonment and civilizational collapse. The presence of a single bird in flight creates a contrast between the organic and the cosmic, suggesting that life persists even in a face of overwhelming cosmic indifference. This work demonstrates Beksiński's ability to combine intimate human concerns with universal themes, creating an image that speaks to both personal isolation and cosmic loneliness. This atmospheric masterpiece depicts a mysterious vessel created in 1972. I call it the ghost ship. It features a floating ship above turbulent waters, moving towards a burning horizon under an ominous sky. The ship's unusual design defies conventional maritime architecture, appearing more like an ancient temple or mystic ark than a traditional vessel. Crosses and geometric shapes adorn its upper portion, suggesting themes of religious pilgrimage or spiritual journey, while the overall structure seems to breathe with mystic life. The painting brings to life Wagner's Flying Dutchman, which, with its tale of cast sailors doomed to wander the seas eternally, reflecting Beksiński's interest in Germanic romanticism and dark folklore. The work was created during a period when Beksiński was particularly fascinated with alchemy, Eastern philosophy, and dream analysis, influences that permeate the painting's symbolic content. A small entrance in the ship's hull glows with vivid orange light, contrasting dramatically with the vessel's dark exterior and suggesting the presence of mysterious life within. Above this entrance, a wooden bas-relief appears to gaze at an enormous skull towering above it, while the entire scene is shrouded in cobwebs that enhance its impression of a ghost ship drifting through time. The painting exemplifies Beksiński's ability to create calm, symmetrical compositions that nonetheless carry profound emotional weight and suggest narrative possibilities without explicit storytelling. I personally call this one the Bone Garden. Created in 1971, it depicts a surreal, skeletal landscape under a dark, ominous sky. This early work from Beksiński's fantastic period presents a haunting landscape filled with scattered skeletal remains and bones under an ominous, orange-tinged sky. The composition creates a meditation on mortality and the cyclical nature of life and death, with the bone-strewn ground suggesting an ancient battlefield or prehistoric graveyard where countless generations have returned to dust. The painting's horizontal format emphasizes the vast scale of the necropolis, while the turbulent sky above suggests the scene exists in a realm beyond normal time and space. The work demonstrates Beksiński's early mastery of atmospheric effects and his ability to create landscapes that function as psychological streets rather than mere geographical locations. This technical execution shows Beksiński's developing skills with oil paint and his growing confidence in creating complex textural effects. Each bone and skull is rendered with careful attention to an anatomical accuracy, yet the overall composition transforms these individual elements into a unified field of mortality that speaks to universal human concerns about death and remembrance. The orange-tinted sky creates an otherworldly illumination that makes the bone field seem to glow with its own inner light, suggesting that death itself might be a form of transformation rather than mere termination. This work establishes many of the themes that would dominate Beksiński's fantastic period: the beauty of decay, the persistence of form beyond life, and the creation of landscape that exist as much in consciousness as in physical reality. This painting, created in 1978, features a mysterious Gothic ruin that appears to be both ancient and alive, with root-like formation cascading through arched doorways and windows. These organic growths blur the line between plant and flesh, architecture and anatomy, creating a structure that seems to breathe and pulse with mysterious life. The stark contrast between warm brownish red tones and the cool blue light emanating from within the structure suggests both decay and rebirth, death and transcendence. This work demonstrates Beksiński's mastery of texture and atmosphere, with each surface rendered in detail that invites prolonged examination. The starry night sky, visible through one of the windows, adds a cosmic dimension to the earthbound decay, suggesting that this architectural organism exists in a liminal space between earth and heaven. Critics have noted the painting's resemblance to a religious Renaissance painting whose unusual symbolic window opened and let literal heaven and hell take place in the architecture, highlighting Beksiński's ability to transform familiar religious imagery into something entirely new and unsettling. All these works demonstrate the remarkable consistency and evolution of Beksiński's artistic vision throughout his career. Each painting functions simultaneously as a technical achievement and a philosophical statement, creating what the artist called photographs of dreams that capture states of consciousness rather than external reality. Beksiński's refusal to provide explanation to his works allows these images to function as pure visual experience, inviting viewers to engage with their own fears, hopes, and spiritual questions through encountering with his painted worlds. These works collectively demonstrate why Beksiński remains one of the most compelling and influential artists of the late 20th century, creating images that continue to resonate with contemporary audience seeking meaning in an increasing complex and often incomprehensible world. Thank you for watching. Until the next one.